From Cypress Radio in Cypress, Texas, you've tuned into the Special Ed Section 504 Radio Hour, and I'm your host, Louis Geigerman. Welcome back. Well, my listeners on the show know that discipline has been an issue that has been the theme of many shows. Most recently, I did an interview with Dr. Ross Green. And what Dr. Green and I talked about, and Sandra Kaplan was in on that too, what we talked about was how, the dangers effectively of restraint and seclusion and how it's overused and how it doesn't help. In fact, anybody wants to go back and look at that interview, it's on my YouTube channel at Sped Radio. I recommend you all do that. Very enlightening. But in that same vein, I want to talk to, we have an individual that really is similarly out to eradicate restraint and seclusion. That's Juliet Hiznay. And she's a graduate of Boston College. Boy, you didn't have to go far from COPA, to go to that conference now, did you? And George Mason University School of Law. Earlier in her career, Ms. Hiznay litigated civil and criminal cases in federal and state courts. 2013, she founded her law firm, the J.D. Hiznay PLLC, based in Arlington, VA. In 2013, she's been a special education disability rights attorney for 10 years, representing families in public and private educational settings through preschool through post-secondary. In 2021 and 2019, she was recognized by her legal partners as a top schools and education attorney in Arlington Magazine. Congratulations. She has appeared many times on TV and radio, TV programs in Virginia and the DC metropolitan areas, including Scoop with Catherine Reed, the Kojo Namande, did I spell that right? Namande?
Kojo Namde.
Okay. On WAMU, National Public Radio, Virginia Public Media, and WMAL, I know WMAL, radio to discuss civil rights issues affecting children. She has worked extensively on public policy and state legislation in Virginia. In 2016, she drafted and obtained passage of the Virginia Code Section 16.1-274.2, which is an evidentiary law that protects students from being criminalized for being disabled. My God, I get so many cases like that. I'm filing one on Monday on this very same thing that just irks me to death. I don't even want to go there, but trust me, that's what I find a lot of my practice doing. Model recommendations on restraint and seclusion for Virginia Public Schools divisions, and the author of What to Do When Trauma Manifests at School, published by the Organization for Autism Research. Juliet Hiznay.
Yes.
Welcome to the Special Ed Section 504 Radio Hour.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here with you.
Fantastic. We had met over at the COPA conference here recently in Boston, and he said, "Hey, why don't we do an interview?" And I said, "Why not?" And so, let's start this off. Let's start our audience off with an issue of what dangers. Let's talk about restraint and how that is dangerous, and how that is something that we need to eliminate.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'd be happy to. So restraint and seclusion, I like to take them separately, right? Both of them, though, really are about losing control over your own body and losing your autonomy and your agency. So this is one reason why it is so incredibly terrifying and has such a huge psychological and mental health impact on children, because it would also have that impact on adults, but adults are better able to advocate for themselves, communicate, and protect themselves, quite honestly. So, I have researched this issue quite a bit, have looked at a lot of the background, including the very old investigation that came out of, what was the newspaper that published that? Way back when, was it the Current? Anyway, they did a series on restraint and seclusion in the hospital setting and discovered that there were rafts of, deaths all over the country and injuries, and it just wasn't being reported. And of course, that's an institutional setting, it was focused on adults, but somehow these procedures made their way into our public schools, and to a lesser degree into our private schools. And they do have psychological and physical impacts on students that are really extreme at times. They tend to escalate behaviors, and they cause them to end up in more restrictive settings. It does cause death. We had a death involving a restraint in Virginia in a school in the Leesburg area a few years back. And we've seen many videos, right, online of children being sat on or in prone positions, or even in supine positions, which is prone is face down, supine is face up, on the ground, being held onto the floor. And, people have broken bones. And once you take someone down to the floor, if they're in a panic and they're struggling, they exhaust themselves. There is a biochemical reaction that happens that can actually lead to organ failure in severe instances. And there are even some cases, though rare, of deaths that are caused by that kind of a panic response, even in a seclusion setting. So that's sort of the general idea around why it's so dangerous. But the thing that makes it even more dangerous for the school setting is that it actually makes all of the behaviors worse. So you actually end up escalating the student. And in the case of a restraint that's on the ground, you don't really have a good way of letting go of that student, because as long as you're putting hands on them and they're in that state of panic, they're in that fight or flight mode, the likelihood of aggression as soon as you let go is extremely high. So it's dangerous to both students and to staff.
It's funny. It's not funny. But, just the other day, I had a school district that was doing a team restraint of an 8-year-old. And, this kid wasn't that big a kid. He was pretty small. But I'm thinking, what broke down?
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I see when people restrain, or well, let me backtrack. When people do interventions, you can talk about this. You're the one that's done all the research, not me.
Mm-hmm.
But people are only as good as the training that they've been given, and they'll revert back to what the training that they've received when they react. What do you say about that?
Well, first of all, the training is focused on the wrong things. The training is really focused on how to seclude and how to restrain. It's not focused on how to avoid escalating children in the first instance. And so this is really where we have to think of it through that disability lens and meeting the child where they're at, right? And when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you see that, your basic functional body needs, you need to have fluids, and you need to have food, and you need to have shelter. Those are met. The next one up is you need to feel like you're not going to be attacked at any moment, right? So that level of feeling safe, is the next tier up in the hierarchy. And the fact is that if you can't meet that need for a child, then they're not going to access any of the higher level needs that they need to get to. And it's always funny to me when people in meetings, the teachers in meetings and other staff say, well, you know, so-and-so is not available for learning. Because really, whether or not the student is available for learning, you know, this is like the excuse for why they haven't progressed, right? Is completely dependent on the approach of the staff members and how they approach the child. Absent, you know, someone who is in florid psychosis, right, or in the midst of a panic attack, really, you know, it's about that. So whenever I see language like that, I just kind of roll my eyes because I can't help myself. It just makes me pretty crazy. So what gets an 8-year-old to an escalated state, you know? And it is about their level of comfort or discomfort in the environment that they're in. And so what you really have to do is you have to adjust to that child's needs. And that means you need to actually figure out what those needs are. And then you need to adapt the environment to the child instead of expecting the child to adapt to you.
Well, that kind of sounds like Ross Green's philosophy. We need to assess the lagging skills, right, and the unsolved problems.
Right. And so often the kid is getting sent to the office to be spoken to, and they're being talked at, you know, about all of the things that they did wrong, or they're being asked to process what just happened in a moment when they're actually still escalated. So if you talk to trauma specialists, you know, if you've got a kid who is in a fight or flight mode, they can't do those things at that time. You need to give them at least 20 minutes, maybe even more than that, maybe even, you know, wait until another time or another day altogether to talk to a child about what happened. And then if they're very young and they really don't have a level of self-awareness, talking to them about that is not necessarily very helpful, you know, because it just reminds them of this terrible experience that happened and it makes them feel like they can't move on. You know, they never get a shot. And this is why I am so incredibly opposed to point systems and level systems. What you're doing is you're taking children and you're saying, you have to earn the right to exist like a normal student. Okay, you have to meet all of these benchmarks that no other students have to meet, you know, the typically developing kids in the regular school setting. They don't have to worry about being monitored all day long of whether or not they're meeting this expectation, that expectation, the other. And what the children tend to do, especially the younger ones, is they tend to hyper focus on meeting those standards because of course they want to please the adults. Of course they want to do what people are expecting of them. And so they then start to experience their entire day as just one big hurdle they can never get over, and they can never earn their way out of this more restrictive setting that they find themselves in.
You know, I digress. Before our interview, I had an IEP meeting a few minutes ago, and this child, well, problems were coming about in second. Well, really, I guess we had problems in third grade, and then they started fourth grade, and I said, you know, look. I mean, they were restraining the kid. He had all of these suspensions.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, are you guys really getting to, I mean, and how has that really helped things? I'm looking at your data. It doesn't look like things are changing here.
That's right.
You know, and they said, yeah, you're right. I said, okay, well, you know, if it's, you know, it sounds like, you know, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, that's what you're doing. How about let's think about it? And, you know, I mentioned to him about, has anybody read The Explosive Child before? And fact, well, actually, no, I'll tell you what happened. This was before the meeting. This was before today's meeting. I talked to the director and asked him, "You ever read that?" I said, "Sure, I did." I mean, he's a psychologist. He said, "Sure, I did. I haven't read the most recent stuff." I mean, everybody read The Explosive Child. And he said, "Well, maybe you might want to see some new information about what you can do." And from Dr. Green, he said, I'm open to it. They adopted the whole thing
Mhm,
and they started doing that. And
mhm.
now we're not seeing restraints of this kid.
Right.
They actually are trying to figure out what's going on with them. That's what these schools need to do.
Yes,
It makes their life easier,
it
their
does.
staff easier, if they would just take the time.
Yes, taking the time to really understand that child, but also taking the time to understand how much the way they behave impacts the kids, right? So, I've had many, many cases I've handled where children have completely changed in their external behaviors and in their school performance by doing two things. One is developing relationships and rapport with the staff, that are respectful in a reciprocal way. And the other is actually focusing on communication deficits in children. Because if you start to look through that as a communication difficulty, whether it's because you have a serious mental health thing happening, or if it's because of some kind of social skills issue or lack of ability to speak, oral language, those things play such a huge role in being able to self-advocate and being able to share and provide feedback. And yet it's amazing how much the adults will take a posture that is pulled right out of the criminal justice system, which, I've had quite a bit of experience with. And they've really adopted techniques from the prison system. It's really kind of shocking and outrageous.
Are they
The
saying,
psychiatric institutions are ahead of them, right? They're ahead of them.
are they putting kids in the hole?
They are putting kids in the hole. They are. It's isolation. Now, of course, we're not talking about, meeting the standards of the level of isolation we talk about under prison regulations, but the prison regulations are also internationally recognized to be inhumane in this country. So there's that piece of it too, right? To say, 23 out of 24 hours, you're going to be isolated by yourself in a room makes people, crazy, not to be insulting, but it does actually have a massive impact on their mental health. And it's extremely damaging to people. They really lose the ability to function normally. And that withholding of social engagement is very damaging. Humans are social animals, and we need to be able to interact with one another. We need that, just as we need touch, just as like we need food, and comfort and sleep and shelter. So these are very basic human needs. But what I see happening in schools is this very sort of throwback attitude of authoritarian approaches to children where the focus is on compliance. I mean, don't you think, Louis, that if we got $1 for every time a compliant showed up in an IEP in this country, we would be so wealthy? Because that word is like their favorite word. Compliance, compliance, compliance. He's not compliant. And then the other one, of course, is it's intentional. It's intentional. Okay, well, maybe it's intentional, maybe it isn't. But what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong in your assumption that it's intentional?
Well, part of the problem, I see two problems. You've got one end where you've got adults that are in a position to make disciplinary decisions, and they're looking for their pound of flesh.
Mm,
I
mhm,
see that time and time and time again,
mhm.
you know? I just that's something that's extremely disturbing to me. Um, and how do we and how do we I know I asked Ross the same question. It's how do we get past how do we get past that? Because they're I guess they're taught it as well, when they're growing up, that's how it was in their house,
Mhm,
their house, even though,
mhm, mhm.
we're not thinking like we need to and stepping back from the situation. I think that's a
Well,
huge part of it.
yeah. I mean, certainly, I think it requires a mindset change. And we were going along a trajectory there. I mentioned the psychiatric setting, the institutional psychiatric setting. They are so much further along than where the schools are in terms of restraint and seclusion. They have protocols in place. Our expert psychiatrist, Dr. Bhavin, who's on the Coalition for Trauma Informed Schools with me, he talks about how Children's National has requirements of time limitations that are extremely strict. They have requirements of having a full assessment after there's a seclusion. And we don't have those systems in place in the school setting. And then beyond that, really, in most instances, the reaction is occurring after the child's behavior has stopped. And so, I'll give you an example. High school student, severe autism, non-speaking, gets all agitated during PE, runs after a student and hits them. Okay. And then stops. But in the meanwhile, the staff reaction is, oh, this student's hitting other students. We have to do something. So they call the SRO and then proceed to chase this student around the gym and get him more escalated. And then there's more of a physical altercation as they're basically tackling this rather large male student to the ground. And then you're dealing with the suspension and you're dealing with all of the other. So of course I come into a situation like that and, it's very clear what's going on. They're not addressing the communication needs. They are escalating by bringing in an SRO. They are chasing the student instead of just shadowing the student and making sure that they don't hit anyone else, right? Then they're talking at the student incessantly and loudly, and they're already in a gym with a whole bunch of other stuff going on with lots of noise, right? So this is the kind of thing that can happen when you are just reacting to a situation. And quite honestly, it's not that I don't have sympathy for teachers who are reacting, because they're human beings, they're human beings, but it is their job to stop and think before they act. That is actually their job, to do that. And oftentimes that's not happening.
Oh my God. I mean, this is really freaking me out because I'll tell you why. Because
Okay.
today we were drafting a due process complaint
Mm,
on an SRO that was sitting next to this kid. He thought he had a vape in him. He was sitting next to him at his table,
mhm,
and he tells him to empty his pocket, and he empties his pocket, and there's nothing there. And then he gets up, and he wants to go to the bathroom. Okay, and so in a cafeteria, a loud cafeteria, he calls him out, and he yells at him. The kid continues, and one thing I forgot. The kid's got a processing speed of 56.
mm.
Think about that for a minute.
Yep.
Okay, so we got a delayed, we already know he's going to have a delayed reaction, and it
Mhm.
can constantly following him. Then another one followed him. And he says, don't go in the bathroom. Well, he needed to go. He was feeling uncomfortable. And he goes in there, he sees one toilet's hadn't been flushed, so he goes in there and flushes it. They accuse him of flushing a vape down the toilet, which I never saw. And I'm serious now. And that, oh, he's charged with he's been charged. Now, I didn't mean the DA's taking it now, okay? But he's charged with evading a police officer's order.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you know, people, give me a break. Barbers Hill ISD, you all need some serious retraining.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I wrote a blog years ago, actually, as I first started coming into this work, because, you know, I guess I was naive in thinking that people, as an attorney who had been, you know, in the courts and understood procedural rights and the importance of evidence and the reliability of evidence and so on, I was so shocked the first time I went into a disciplinary meeting, because none of that is happening in these disciplinary meetings. And these school personnel don't know, they haven't been trained on what is valid interrogation techniques. They have not been trained in what is reliable evidence.
Oh, yes, yes, I've seen that they have been trained on interrogation, but they're using police interrogation techniques.
Right. That's my point. And so, in other words, you know, CPS is trained, right? I am dealing with a child. But instead, what they've done is they've gone out again, going into the law enforcement arena and pulling in what they think are these techniques that are used with adults. They were designed for adults. And basically, they are intimidation techniques, right? They're intimidation techniques that are being used for somebody who has already been investigated to a certain degree, or they have been seen carrying out, you know, something. Or there's got to be some, when you make an arrest, right? You're supposed to have articulable suspicion at the very least. You're supposed to have, you know, probable cause, right, to bring a charge against somebody. That doesn't happen in the school setting. What happens in the school setting is they go fishing, you know? So, and also kids don't like to get in trouble. So they may make stuff up, you know? Some kids want to pin it on somebody else and they'll make stuff up about somebody else. And there's really no, it seems to me that there's really no filter there of sort of thinking, is this information reliable before they move forward, right? And then, of course, we put the disability lens over the top of that, and it gets just 10 times worse.
I'm sorry I digressed about that, but I mean, I've seen, I mean, this, I'm living this right now, and it's like, oh my God. But then I see a case like this 8-year-old where they're feeling, you know, I mean, and I don't think the kid's Bam Bam, but he's, you know, but he's 8-year-old. And like, really, I mean, tell me, so so tell me what you and the organizations that you're working with, what are you all doing to try to stop that or to change things?
You think that's bad? I've got wind of 2 cases recently in Virginia, in Northern Virginia. Okay, this is a very wealthy area.
Well, look, I know Loudoun County,
supposedly enlightened.
Well, I don't know. I know,
and they're trying to expel 2 kids, 1 8 and 1 10.
Well, I know Loudoun County. I know Loudoun County, and I've had dealings with them. Okay, so no, I know Northern Virginia. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, it's okay. It's okay. No, but I mean, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, you're going to expel them. They've got disabilities. I mean, what is that? What is that? Who is doing this and why? You know, I don't understand. It's as if we're erasing everything that we ever learned about child development, and we're saying none of that's relevant in our context, you know? And actually, it seems to me that we expect more out of children in terms of their behavioral control than we expect out of adults in the workplace.
I think part of that is, all right, so who's making the rules in the school district? Who's making the rules with the code of conducts? It's the board of trustees.
Right.
The board of trustees, people need to reach the board of trustees and tell them how things need to be. People need to reach the board of trustees and said, do we really need to have SROs in the school all the time? I mean, I understand people are concerned about school shootings and all. I get that. But on the other hand, when we got these school trustees that these we've got these board just give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second here. I know when we have, we have, these people are not the ones that are being trained. We've got to let them know, we have SROs that are parading the halls and criminalizing just kids' behavior. It's going on. This is what I'm seeing time and time again. Right. We've got to reach these board of trust. I don't know. You tell me. I think we have to reach the boards because the boards are making the codes of conduct.
Yeah, and if they're elected boards, then that's about changing who gets elected, right? But I also think that the boards sometimes do respond, and that is an avenue of addressing this. So for example, here locally where I am, in Arlington County, the public schools, the school board did actually pull the SROs out of the buildings. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have assigned school resource officers, who of course are police officers. It just means that they don't no longer have an office in the school, right? Where they just stay and sit, and I'm not sure what they do. I'm sure that they have plenty of things that they're doing all day long, but part of what they're doing is monitoring children, trying to see if anybody commits a criminal offense, right?
I had a kid, a middle schooler, that, how old is he? Is he 11 or 12 years old? I think so. And first of all, the school district fought the case that the kid wasn't in the spectrum, which he was. They said he was ADHD. In the meantime, we had evidence from outside assessors, including independent evaluators, that said, yes, he is. And he reacts differently to stimuli as a result. And we had a case that, forget the academic side of it, I'm not going to even get into that, okay? But there was a problem also that he was dyslexic too. We just had a 4-day hearing on this in December. And we had, in this case, a SRO, this kid was like, he's a little kid, but he had this thing where he was having to touch, he had his hand touching the wall all the way through the cafeteria. I mean, he had some sensory issues. I mean,
that's a classic.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then he has a tendency to cower under tables and stuff like that. And so the SRO, this big SRO, I mean, this guy must have been, 6'2", 6'3", 250, big guy. And he's trying to talk with him, and the kids, just trying to fall to the floor. Next thing you know, he puts him in he takes him in a restraint. He puts him in a restraint, puts his hands all over him, and the kid's screaming and kicking, and he hauls him out of the lunchroom. By the way, all of that was on video.
Oh, well.
And so after that, parents, told them about, complained about it and all. They bring over a present to the kid. like like this is a mea culpa present, um, they get brought over a gift for the kid to reestablish, that not that make all police officers are bad, kind of thing. And I think he had to go through retraining. Oh, did I mention we won the case? But it may be appealed. But there you go. We've got an SRO that didn't understand the BIP, didn't have a clue. Well, besides the point, they didn't have him properly identified and didn't have an appropriate BIP on him anyway, and taking into account his sensory needs.
Right. I mean,
Don't
the
get me
sensory
started.
thing, it's really infuriating because, I mean, how many times have we heard, oh, occupational therapists can only address fine motor skills and handwriting. And oh, by the way,
Oh,
we don't have to
come
do that
on.
anyway, because now we can just type. They can type, so no problem.
But they better not do that with me around, because that'll be a DP filed on
No,
that
I mean,
one.
I sit there and I say, yeah, that's a critical life skill. He's not, taking his device everywhere he goes his entire life, so this is not, no. You have to teach the kid how to write, okay, sorry. But they do try that on parents, and parents buy into it. They do. But the sensory piece drives me crazy, in particular because we can be sensitive to that. If we're actually adding the accommodations that are needed for this child, and by the way, they're not always the same accommodations. How many times have you seen the same 5 accommodations on every single IEP, as if every kid needs the exact same thing? They all need to sit next to the teacher. They all need to have a visual schedule. They all need to have whatever, a time timer, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Small group testing. They all need small group testing. Well, guess what? That's not really true. Small group testing can mean that you've got, 5 different things happening not in the same room, and then you could have a kid there with ADHD who's like not able to focus because they're trying to listen to every accommodation that's being given to every child, and they're better off in the gen ed classroom where it's quiet during a test, So I really wish that teams would not rush the whole discussion about accommodations at the end of the meetings. I think they run out of time and then they rush through that as if it's nothing. It's actually really significant, I think, and something we really need to work on. But one of the things that we've been trying to get done here in the Commonwealth is to educate parents on basically letting school divisions know that restraint and seclusion are contraindicated for them. And if you can get a doctor to say that, then you've got something that you can take to your school and you can say, hey, the doctor says this is a contraindicated, and that if you do this, it's going to result in XYZ escalations, behaviors, et cetera.
Well, part of the problem that I see now, we're okay. Well, I'm in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The state says it's okay to do restraint and seclusion under certain guidelines.
Right.
And they just can't.
Mm-hmm.
I just, and that's what the school district's going to fall back on. Well, we can do it. We have an absolute right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether they should be doing it's another issue, but that's a bigger issue.
And we did recently promulgate in Virginia the regulations. For a long time, we had regulations in private school, but not in public schools, which was kind of backwards. That was a little weird.
Yeah.
But we did that. It took them a very long time after getting passage by members of the General Assembly. We had to go to the General Assembly in Virginia to force the VDOE to do regulations for public schools, which is insane. But we did have to do that. And the regulations, of course, there's so many loopholes. You can drive a truck through them. And one of the problems that we have with them is that, of course, yes, restraint and seclusion numbers are highest among children with disabilities. But guess what? If you overlap that with race and ethnicity, it skyrockets. So I have a real problem with the fact that our restraint and seclusion regulations are actually under the special education section of the regulations in Virginia, because that's telling everybody this is just a disability issue. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with implicit bias. It has everything to do with implicit bias. And these are the children I'm serving who are getting criminalized, right? And a lot of that has to do with, do I view this individual as being dangerous, you know? And why do you see this child as being dangerous? You know, what is it about them that says danger to you? There's a big gender divide there too. And I think that that plays a role as well, you know, especially as male students get larger, as they get older, you know. But, you know, one of the questions is if you can reduce and almost eliminate behaviors by adjusting what the staff are doing, then why aren't they doing that instead of restraining and secluding? Why not? Right? And I do think that it is, a lot of that is about culture. A lot of that is about school climate. And this notion that you have to do what I say. And if you don't do what I say and you don't respond in the way that I want, within the time period that I want, and with the tone of voice that I want, then that is actually an affront to me personally. You are insulting me as the authority in this room, and you are showing that I don't have control over my classroom, and therefore I have to get you under control, right? I strongly suspect that the origin of a lot of this is in the education programs that are taught in our colleges and in our graduate schools, that somehow this approach to education that presumes that the teacher knows more about a subject, which is not always true, in fact, frequently untrue with secondary school students, people who have lived experience, and that's not taken into consideration, you know, that they may know a whole lot about another country or another culture because they're coming from there, that young children can't have real conversations that are meaningful in the school setting. Of course they can. Yes, they can. And they do very frequently if you allow them to do that, you know? So to me, a lot of this has to do with the lack of respect towards children. Why do we not respect children? I don't know. Do you have an idea of why we don't respect children? I don't get it.
I don't get that. I feel like, you know, we don't find, adults don't want to find our, you know, we're supposed to know more. We're supposed to have more experience. And for us to guide them, we have to show that we know more and that we are more and we're more powerful and more knowledgeable. And that's how that is. I mean, as an adjunct to that, so we're dealing with that the kids aren't respected.
Mhm.
The other part of it is that if we look at classic behavior,
Mhm.
which we have in the schools, functions of the behavior can be very, very limited. And we get ourselves trapped in, oh, well, a kid's trying to avoid something,
Oh,
is sensory seeking. And do you get my real?
yes, it has
And
no meaning. It's just
what
a
why
glib,
don't you
it's a glib statement.
why don't you address that? Because
I will.
that's part of it, because
Oh yeah,
we're limited. They're limited to what the functions are, which
right.
may have no bearing to what really the lagging skill actually is, or the problem that the child has.
Right. So, you know, one thing someone told me once is that when you have training, people only retain 10% of what they learned, and then they may not retain it accurately. Okay. So that's one thing to remember, right?
Right.
But you're talking about behaviorism, you're talking about Skinner-based behaviorism, right?
Right.
Which basically kind of is the notion that you can actually get a person to adapt how they act by giving them inputs of one kind or another, either positive reinforcements or negative reinforcements, and controlling their environment in that way. And what's really strange about it, you know, I'm not a BCBA. I haven't been through the kind of training that behavior specialists go through. I'm on the receiving end of that, watching it, you know, in my own personal experiences with my own child, and then with so many other people's children, of seeing how the function of the behavior gets reduced down to 3 elements: avoidance, escape, and attention seeking. Those are the 3, right? Those are the 3. Well, why does the child want attention? Why is the child looking to avoid doing something, right? And, what is it that they're trying to escape? Are they feeling afraid? Are they feeling not capable? Are they in fear physically from something that's going on in their life, whether that's a reasonable thought or it isn't a reasonable thought? Are they embarrassed? Are they feeling shamed? And there's so many different ways that we can eliminate those kinds of inputs in the schools, like, putting up people's scores on the wall, or talking about who's, the better student, who's not the better student, like the walls of shame that are all over the place, all throughout, the United States in school buildings. That kind of thing is really unhelpful. How about red light, green light, yellow light, this, and, the public changing of the pegs of, red is you're in deep trouble, and yellow is you're in the danger zone, and green means, okay, you're doing well, good behavior, right? That constant feeling of monitoring that, and knowing, not only am I being told that I'm in the danger zone or I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm going to get in trouble, but everybody in the room knows it too. And sometimes everyone in the school knows it. So what is it that we are doing that is making that child behave that way? Sometimes it's medical, Lewis. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have worked with families where there is a significant medical issue. The child is either in pain, not sleeping, they may have a communication disorder, so they can't self-advocate, they can't communicate how they're feeling, they may not even know how to recognize pain in their own bodies, and they're certainly not communicating it to others, okay, for whatever reason. The fact that that is then translated into intentional misbehavior at school is really tragic, and it has very serious long-term outcomes for kids, because they may try to do things to, avoid drawing attention to it. They may learn that they shouldn't actually, tell people or try to communicate what they're feeling, and if that's the only way they can communicate is physically or by moving, say kid has to go to the bathroom, so they just leave the classroom. Oh, that's an elopement. They must have been avoiding something. No, they needed to use the toilet. Okay, so can we have some common sense in trying to figure this out? But I will say parents need to communicate. If there is a medical issue going on, you have to figure it out. You have to get to the bottom of it. You have to pursue the specialist, and you got to communicate with the school. Because if you don't, and you don't document it, you don't get it into, a medical plan and go through the clinic and then share it with the entire IEP team and then add it as an accommodation to the IEP, then you are at risk of the team thinking that your child is misbehaving, not because they're ill, but because of some other thing that they concocted as part of their, behavioral assessment. And the behavioral assessments are just not detailed enough. I mean, I've never gone into a meeting where they're designing an FBA where I felt like it had enough detail. You need to know who, where, when, what they're doing, who's around them, if, some peer is triggering them for one reason or another. You need a lot of detail in order to figure out why children are reacting the way they're reacting. And then that's the only way you can find the patterns. So I do a lot of that kind of work. Mm-hmm.
I hate to digress again, but this case that I'm filing on Monday, in the behavior intervention plan, it says that the student has a tendency to elope, which he did when he went to the bathroom, and B, he basically he doesn't follow adult directions. It's in his behavioral intervention plan, but yet he evaded a police officer's command.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it took 2.5 minutes for him to get from the cafeteria to the bathroom. Well, he still had enough time. He has a 56 processing speed.
So the behavior was caused by the disability, and that was exactly what I was trying to aim for with that one piece of the Virginia code that we actually got onto the books here in Virginia, which is huge. It's only for school-based offenses, it's only for misdemeanors, but it's still a very, very strong piece of legislation because you can use that evidence then in court as a total defense to the criminal case.
Yeah, but they found in his manifestation determination review that it wasn't a manifestation, and nor was it an issue that their behavior intervention plan was
Right.
not implemented.
But here's the thing.
Really?
Here's the thing about that. This piece of legislation does not refer to that because I was afraid when I was drafting it that if we mentioned the manifestation determination reviews, that would be open and shut. They wouldn't look any deeper into the evidence that was in the record, right? Yeah. And we have this perverse incentive in schools where you go to the manifestation determination review. If they want that kid out of that school and they want them in an alternative school or a more restrictive setting, or they want to expel them because they just don't want to deal with them anymore, they have a perverse incentive to say, no, this is not disability related. Why? Because if it's disability related, they can't discriminate against the kid, right? Unless it falls under one of those really narrow, exceptions under IDEA for very serious, dangerous, kids.
Right.
So, to me, I think that, we just have this criminalization of disability that's going on. And then to put these control tactics involving restraint and seclusion as a layer on top of that, we're just buying ourselves so many problems. And one of the biggest issues is that it has long-term psychological impacts. Basically, you are building violence in your society when you are restraining and secluding children because you are causing trauma to them. And the trauma that they're experiencing is actually going to make them worse, not better.
I had a couple of students that were put into the seclusion room, and when they were put in there, and also under the law, they have to be able to get out, be able to leave that room on their own when they need to. But no, they basically only one way from the outside can they get. They can't get in if you're in the inside. Mm-hmm. But the kid, I know two kids that totally disrobed in that room when they were put in seclusion rooms.
They strip down, they urinate and defecate. It is, we talk about that actually. The Coalition for Trauma-Informed Schools talks about that in our recommendations on restraint and seclusion. We believe that is really something that you see very commonly with young children. And it's because they have lost all control. And the only control that they can exercise at that point is that kind of thing. But it's also the fear, for some children, it's a fear response, right? It's a fear response. So you can see lots of what people would normally call very outlandish behavior in very young children who don't have any way of controlling their environment and they are in a panic. So that's a classic. The urinating, the defecating, the stripping off of clothes. It's a very common response in young children who are being secluded. And that just tells you how incredibly terrified they are.
For sure. So, okay. So tell me what we're doing in raising consciousness with legislatures on the national scene. What are we doing about that? And then as part of that, what can parents do about it?
Well, anytime you see red flags as a parent, I'll take that one first. You really need to hunt down the information until you have it. Why are you seeing all of a sudden in the morning your kid is refusing to go to school? Your kid's begging you not to go to school. Your kid's fighting, punching, hitting you, running away to keep from going to school. Guess what? If your kid is doing that, there is something seriously wrong. And it might be the bus driver, it could be a peer, it could be the school environment. And yes, it could be restraint and seclusion, because let me tell you, I see it all the time. Give me a kid with school refusal, I'm going to find a restraint and seclusion in there 75, 80% of the time. Okay. It's a very high risk. Take your kid to the doctor. Okay. Take your kid to the therapist. If the kid has been physically restrained, they probably need both. If they've been secluded, even though they might not have any physical injuries that have to be assessed, and they might, because they may head bang, okay, in a seclusion room, take your kid to a therapist, psychiatrist, child psychiatrist, and get them assessed, okay? Have a third party look at that, because you don't have that clinical expertise, they do. And you need to be documenting it and make sure that you have all the information in the record that you need, because you may need to get, you may need to be able to show that this happened and what the injuries were. Trauma assessments. I can't emphasize that enough. Parents, if your kid is telling you through all of their behavior that they're terrified to go to school, take it seriously, get yourself a special education attorney, and let them help you walk through the ways that you can avoid truancy filings and you can deal with the attendance issues. You do not want to force your child to go back into a school where they are in fear for their lives and their well-being.
There are some, you can, some advocates can certainly help with that as well.
Absolutely,
in setting it up. I frankly do that all the time.
I'm sure you do, Louis. I think that there's a different level of training depending on your lay person. So, I mean, I do think that you want someone who's either extremely experienced in this arena,
agreed,
or an attorney, because someone who's hasn't been dealing with this level of severity of situation, it may not be equipped to handle that.
I got to tell you something real quick, because we only got a few minutes left. I'm actually working on a case right now where they've had a kid, and I believe this or not, you talk about restraints. This kid was put in a Riften chair for 75% of his day.
Yeah.
And that's currently, by the way, that's currently being litigated.
I can imagine. Well, sometimes you got to make lemonade out of lemons, right? I once found a documented mechanical restraint and we ended up getting a private tape placement. So, hey, sometimes it operates to your benefit, but not usually.
Yeah. Well, this district is playing the Sergeant Schultz response. I see nothing, I hear nothing, but we have witnesses. Anyway, I'm sorry to digress.
No, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. Yes, that there are many cases like that, and I know that there are some excellent lay advocates across the country, and you're obviously one of them. We have. What do we do more broadly as a society? Right. Well, we need to support federal legislation.
Well, COPA, I know that COPA and I know Ross Green's involved with it and others. Tell us about that for a minute.
Well, that is federal legislation that is an effort to basically eliminate restraint and seclusion in public schools, but it's probably going to come out with some parameters around what can be done and what cannot be done. So it's one of those things where if you have the regulations, at least if they violated them, you can show they violated them. If you don't have anything, then it's a free-for-all. So it's sort of a mixed bag whenever this sort of thing happens. But at least we would have a national standard and a national definition, because guess what? School districts make up their own definition of what seclusion is, right? We don't know what the data is. I mean, shoot, we've got school divisions like Fairfax County next door to me, where I represent a lot of people. They told the U.S. Department of Education that they had 0 incidents for years in a row. Meanwhile, people who were in the trenches like me were fielding multiple cases every single year, and they had thousands. So we actually had a very successful lawsuit filed in the Eastern District of Virginia, and I was involved with some of those families, on the advocacy end. I didn't handle the litigation, But, you know, that case, which is QT versus Fairfax County School Board, that case actually survived a motion to dismiss, and it survived a motion for summary judgment in federal court and then settled. Okay, it did not go to trial, but that is huge, because what it means is they didn't have to go and exhaust under IDEA. They were able to get directly into federal court on the civil rights.
So they were able to use the Fry standard and go right.
Yes, they were.
Because parents could have, if a parent could have been in that standing,
and I believe there were also some constitutional allegations as well that survived.
Cool.
So
cool.
People need to sue. If your child is really being seriously injured and there is a pattern and practice in the school division, you should be suing.
Amen.
You know,
amen.
And you can look at the filings in that case and in the Fairfax case as a way of sort of modeling your case. Now, of course, not all the facts are always the same. So that's a pretty severe situation in that case. But
look, believe it or not, we've just done an hour.
I know.
So my question to you is there anything I missed with you that we needed to say regarding what parents need to do, what we need to do as a society, or anything that you want to put out there for our audience?
We are operating in silos, and we need to integrate those systems. Okay, so we need to take what we know about child development and what we know from child psychiatry, and we need to bring it into those worlds. We need to take what we know about trauma and we need to bring it into the educational setting. We need to stop using military models and policing models as the basis for intervening with children, because they don't work with kids. And I'm not so sure they work with adults either, to tell you the truth. You know, we have a mass incarceration problem in this country, but they certainly do not work for children. They do not belong in our public schools.
Amen to that. Well, Juliet, this has been really a wonderful discussion that's really important, and that I hope people take to heart, and I hope people share with their school boards, and they share with all of those that to do what you're doing to help eradicate restraint and seclusion, because it's really harming lives.
And I gave you a copy of those recommendations the coalition put out, and you're welcome to post those somewhere. I'm not sure where you would put them, but we did a lot of work on that, and we had clinical expertise putting together those recommendations.
I'll have to figure out how we're going to do that, but I will tell you, if anybody wants to contact you, how would they do that?
Well, I have a website, jdhiznay.com. And, you know, they're welcome to contact me through my conflicts form.
So that's jdhiznay.com.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that way, any questions, whatever, they can take.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Juliet, thank you so much for coming. I mean, and sharing it. This is such a vital information, and we need to save lives. And
we do. And thank you so much for agreeing to have me on. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, you bet. So this is Louis Geigerman. I have a company, National Art IEP Advocates. If you want to contact me with my special ed practice, it's National ARD Advocates with an S, National ARD Advocates @gmail.com. For the website, for the radio show, we have Sped Radio 103.5 @gmail.com, spedradio103.com. And of course, if you want to go to the website, excuse me, this is through cypressradio.org, and to bring shows like this to you, they don't work for profit, so please go to their website and make a contribution for any amount to keep shows like this going forward. By the way, this show will be archived on my YouTube channel, Sped Radio. So you go to Sped Radio and you can see this show and some others, and anytime, and feel free to share. Once again, I want to thank my guest, Juliet Hiznay, for coming to the show. I'll see you on the radio and the internet. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.